They had children and teenagers there from Utah with homemade signs protesting in opposition. The mayor of Ely, John Hickman, spoke. He welcomed the guests from Utah. He then pointed out that the Intermountain coal-fired power plant has been operating outside of Delta, Utah for 25 years. It's a 1,600 megawatt coal-fired power plant that supplies power to Southern California. And it's only 2 hours away from the Great Basin National Park. Former GOP Senate candidate John Chachas and chairman of the Steptoe Valley Energy Advocates presented a graph showing that 90% of the power in Utah is generated from coal, as opposed to 15% of the power in Nevada. Many of the local residents in support of the project mentioned the fact that Kennecott operated up there for 8 decades and there was no environmental impact on the Great Basin National Park. All this pressure, opposition, and uncertainty discouraged the funding for this project and the funding for this construction. And as a result, the investors withdrew their proposals.
They didn't cancel them, but they're indefinitely postponed because of all the uncertainty about Markey Waxman, cap and trade, and about all these carbon limits that the Obama administration is going to be placing on the coal industry that Obama announced before he was elected last year. That he was going to make it cost prohibitive for anybody to build a coal-fired power plant.
Harry Reid once enjoyed widespread support up here because a lot of these people that live and work up here are Democrats. They're conservative Democrats, but nonetheless they are Democrats because many of them are union because of all of the mines up here. As you can see, Harry Reid is not very well liked here today in this community, and he ought not take these folks for granted because this election may be very close this year. The loss that NV Energy incurred on purchasing these water rights gets passed on to the ratepayers, you and me, and they cause our power bills to go up. They'll never be able to sell those for what they paid for them. I was reading a comment that a blogger had posted on a website of one of the newspapers up here, speculating that Harry Reid could stand to benefit and gain financially if he were able to acquire those water rights for pennies on the dollar for what NV Energy paid for them to develop Coyote Springs over 150 miles away. As you can see, there's not a lot of water around here. Most of it has to be artificially piped in from elsewhere. Very limited supply of groundwater to support a community with a golf course. Coyote Springs was a result of a land swap that was arranged between Lincoln County and Clark County a number of years ago, and a series of articles appeared in the Los Angeles Times about these very dubious and controversial land deals that were brokered by Senator Harry Reid. Senator Harry Reid is one of the investors out here in this development, among a number of others, and his son was involved in the brokering of these deals. His son-in-law, who is one of the people on the board of his limited liability corporation and also a paid lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Many up here felt that these land deals were conflicts of interest because they involved the BLM and they involved the state legislature, and Harry Reid did a lot of brokering behind the scenes to get this through. The investigative journalistic pieces that appeared in the Los Angeles Times never really led to anything. The whole flap about this kind of went away quietly, and everybody forgot about it. They're still constructing the transmission lines. They're clear-cutting juniper trees along Highway 93 up there outside of Pioche in Lincoln County on the federal power transmission corridor that Harry Reid was able to get established. But they're for the windmills. Wind energy and all these other green forms of energy are very inefficient. They only generate a fraction of the power that one of these plants would have, and they take up vast amounts of acreage. And ironically, a lot of the groups up there in Lincoln County, the ranchers, the hunters, and the conservationists, are opposed to this because they do encroach on wildlife, elk habitat, mule deer, as well as other mammals. And they take up this particular site they want to build on Table Mountain starting in 2011 is going to be 70 square miles, and it's going to disrupt the migration and watering routes of the elk. They're very inefficient. It cost 25 cents a kilowatt hour for wind and solar as opposed to 12 cents a kilowatt hour for oil, coal, and gas. Larger wind turbines can generate up to 1.5 megawatts. 100 windmills will generate 150 megawatts. 200 windmills will generate 300 megawatts. The problem is they consume vast amounts of land to accomplish this. It's only as much as a small off-cycle peak generating plant produces that uses a fraction of the land. One of these letters to the editor in our local newspaper last year, a guy wrote in. He wrote about the newly constructed solar farm at Nellis. It supplies a quarter of the power they use on the Air Force Base. It cost $100 million to install. It saves them $1 million a year, so it's going to take them 100 years to get that payback. Solar power is not viable outside the southwest part of the United States. You can't use it in the northwest, and you can't use it in Connecticut or anywhere east of the Mississippi where it's overcast half of the year. These alternate forms of energy, at best, are supposed to just augment our existing supply of energy. They're not meant to replace the more traditional forms of energy because the technology is not there. It's decades off to increase the output of these things. If we come to over-rely on these alternative forms of energy, it could lead to brownouts and even disruptions in our power supply. A lot of these politicians are lawyers, and they don't understand this because most of them don't have mechanical backgrounds. Most of them don't understand things they can't see, like electricity. And so they don't understand this, and sure, GE's behind it because they're getting lucrative contracts at yours and my expense.
Here in the Mohave Valley, 45 minutes northeast of Las Vegas. Behind me here is Reid Gardner Generating Station. It has a capacity of 597 megawatts. It's operated and owned by NV Energy, formerly of Nevada Power Company. 2006, San Francisco office of the Environmental Protection Agency issued notifications of findings of multiple violations with the Clean Air Act of 1971. They ranged from coal unloading, storage, conveyor belt operation, to not firing their boilers hot enough, to fly ash and lime silo violations. In order to comply with the Clean Air Act and comply with the findings of the Environmental Protection Agency, they were forced to scale back their production to 50% of capacity, below 50% of capacity.
This is Laughlin, Nevada, in the Colorado River, about 45 minutes from Harry Reid's hometown of Searchlight. This is the Mohave Generating Station. It's a 1,582 megawatt plant. Hoover Dam generates approximately 2 gigawatts or 2,080 megawatts of electricity that it supplies to California, Nevada, and Arizona.
And the Sierra Club and federal judges have succeeded in doing what no terrorist was able to do.
In 2005, a federal judge, in response to a lawsuit brought by the Sierra Club, issued an injunction revoking their operating permits. Groups like the Sierra Club and the EPA have been litigating this for years. The coal was mined on the Indian Reservation in Arizona. Cal Edison was the major owner and operator in this facility, and they simply could not afford to implement all the measures that this federal ruling required them to implement to come into compliance with the Clean Air Act. So they closed the plant. Hundreds of jobs were lost because of this, and those are good jobs that supported other jobs in Bullhead City and Laughlin.
Behind me here is Clark Station. My dad used to work here.
Back in the 70s.
This is one of the smaller natural gas-fired power plants. This supplies energy to our electrical grid. And a power plant like this can employ anywhere from 100 to several hundred people. A good paying job.
Linemen, machinists, chemists, engineers, technicians, pipe fitters.
And I just recently read on the internet that they decommissioned 3 units in this facility.
People think of Las Vegas, they think of the gaming industry. They think of the entertainment capital of the world. We do actually have other industries and other businesses besides casinos. Henderson is one of the industrial hubs of southern Nevada. This is the Black Mountain Industrial Complex. TimeEd is one of the major